Welcome back. So far, we've taken a look at how JavaScript interacts with HTML and CSS, and we've seen that we've been able to change text, change styles, and interact with our web page. In this video, we're going to try something fun. We're going to have an exercise where we're going to create a background generator so that for our future projects, we can have a nice, awesome gradient for our backgrounds. We're going to use just a few lines of JavaScript to create this. So let's get started. All right, we have a beautiful blank canvas here. Now open up the console so that as we write code, we make sure we don't make any errors. And we're going to start off with a simple HTML file. We'll call it gradient background. And within the body, we'll have a few things. We'll have an H1 that will say background generator. And we'll also have an H2 that will say current CSS background. And we'll have an H3 that will be blank for now because we're going to be putting the CSS style so that people can copy and paste the background gradient from right in here. And obviously we need JavaScript, so we'll add a script tag and we'll do source equals to script.js. Let's refresh. Now I want to show you two cool things that comes with HTML and CSS. The first is the input type color. And the second is CSS's linear gradient. So CSS3 has these cool gradient backgrounds that we can do. So we'll use this syntax to create our gradient. And for the color picker, we'll use the HTML type color for the input to get a color picker. So we can do that fairly quick. Let's go right below the H2 and we'll create an input. And the type will be color. Name will be color1. And we can actually also give it a default value. So we'll do value and we'll just put in a random hex color. We'll do 00FF00. And we want to have two color pickers because the way gradients work, it goes from one color to the other. So we'll put another color picker. We'll save, change the name to color2. This time this color will have more red. And refresh. And there you go. We have our color pickers. Now the one thing I want to show you, I created a style sheet that I'll provide for you that will have some default style so it looks really, really good. And we can include that in our HTML file. We'll say link style.css. And if I refresh, well, we got an awesome background with our cool font and everything's centered. But let me just show you quickly what made the background have this gradient. All I did was have the background linear gradient, and you go to, and then you give it a direction. We want to go to the right, and we give it the starting color and the ending color. So that's the default color that we have. The rest is all just font and text aligning. So nothing too crazy, nothing that you can't do yourself. But the one thing that we need is this needs to be interactive. If I pick a color here, well, I want it to change. Same for this one. And ideally, if I find a background that I really, really like for my app, I can print it out over here so I can just copy and paste the linear gradient and use that. So let's work on that. What do we know so far? We know that JavaScript can read from the DOM and it can affect it. So we want to read what the value what the colors are of both inputs. And we want to put out a piece of text at the bottom here with those values in the CSS format. So it looks like we'll need to select two inputs and then also select the H3 so we can enter some text here. Let's go to the script.js file. And the first thing we want to do is we want to select the H3. So we'll do var CSS equals document dot query selector. And because there's only one H3, we can just select H3. Okay, we also want to select the colors, and we should give it a class just so we can distinguish them. So I'm going to say class equals color1, and the other one will have class color2. So now we can do variable color1 equals document query selector, and we'll do color1. Again, it's a query selector, so we do class selector just like we do in CSS. And for color2, we do the same thing. This looks good for now. We ideally grab all these and our background should change. Let's check everything and make sure that we are correct in what we've done so far. Let's refresh the page. And there you go. We have our H3. That's where we're going to want to have our CSS text. For our background, we have our input, the first one and the second one. Okay, it looks like we're doing everything right. Now, what do we want to happen? We want to listen to an event where we notice the user's actions here. We've learned about click and mouse center and key press, but this isn't really any of those, is it? Well, there's a really good event for inputs, and it's called input. So anytime the input value changes, which it does every time we change the color, we can detect that. So let's think about how we would do this. We want to have color1 to have an event listener that will have input, and it will have a function that for now we can just console.log color1.value. Then we also want the second color to have the same thing, but for color2. Let's refresh and check. We can remove the console logs because we don't need it anymore. Refresh, and let's see. Look at that. Do you see that in the console? This is getting updated. That's pretty cool. All right, so the first one's working. The second one, that's working too. Awesome. So we're grabbing the colors, the color.value. What do we want to do next with this value? Well, we want to change the background color. And how can we do that? Well, the background, if we right-click and do inspect, let me make this bigger, we see that the background is in the body tag. So ideally, we change this. So let's go back to the console, minimize this, and let's try and change the background now with the information that we have. Anytime color1 changes, we want to grab the background style. Well, again, we can say body equals document dot get element by, and let's add an ID here. We'll say ID gradient, And we can say get element by ID. And we'll say gradient. Again, we want to make sure that we're actually selecting it. So let's try body and refresh. All right, we're getting the body tag. And if we remember, we can change the style of the body by doing style.background. So that's the CSS property, and we can just say red. Let's see if that works. All right, we're changing the color to red, but that doesn't look as good as a gradient. But at least now we know how to change this. So we can say when the first input changes, body.background or style.background equals linear gradient to right. And this is just a syntax you'll have to get used to. And we'll say the first color will be color1.value. And we'll need a comma for that. And the second value will be, let's add a space here, color2.value. So that's the second color picker. And we'll say plus, close the bracket, and the CSS. And we should be good to go. I'm going to put this on a new line just so you can see it. Perfect. And again, JavaScript doesn't see the semicolons here, so it just keeps reading line by line. Okay, so let's save and see if we did that right. I'm going to refresh. And actually, you don't need a semicolon here. So let's see if that works. I'm going to refresh, select the first one, and look at that. We got ourselves the gradient working. But obviously, we need to do the second one as well, because right now it's just console logging. Again, let's do the same thing into the second color picker. I save and refresh. We pick the first one, and we pick the next one. Look at that. That's really pretty. But that should have triggered something. We just copy and pasted the same lines of code. And if we remember, that's a big problem because dry. Do not repeat yourself. So how can we extract this function so that it's a lot cleaner? Well, very easy. We can create a function and we'll say set gradient. And set gradient will, as the name suggests, set our beautiful gradient. So now this function can just be called set gradient. And same for the second color, we can say set gradient. Look how much cleaner that looks. But let's see if everything still works. I'm going to refresh. I'm going to select, oh, and it looks like we broke something. See what we did here? This event of input gets triggered automatically and runs the function. We don't need to call the function because this input event is triggered automatically, and the second parameter automatically gets ran with the event. So now if I save this, select one, everything works. Again, just to reiterate, if we had called the functions like these, the first pass through, when the HTML document's loaded, it reads the script file and it goes through the lines. And when we add the event listener, we also set the gradient. But we want this to be called every time the input is selected. So again, our function is now like this. And we have ourselves a beautiful background generator. We're actually going to use this when we design our final project because, well, I think the backgrounds look pretty cool with this thing. Very cool. And you see how easy that was. Fairly fast, just a few lines of code. I want to show you one last thing. And that is, we've been using add event listener, which is the recommended way of doing things because we're keeping the JavaScript in the JavaScript file. But we could have also done, within the input, an onClick attribute or onInput attribute. So within here, I could have said, because we have this available to us, setGradient, I could have said setGradient. And also on the second one, we would do setGradient. So let's see if this works. If I comment these out so I never add the event listener and I refresh, see that it still changes. What is the difference between doing this and doing it this way? Well, the difference is that here we're adding JavaScript to HTML. Again, separation of concerns. And also, you can see here that we can only add setGradient. So this input can only have one onInput attribute. Versus here where we can keep adding different functions, different events. So this is a lot more extensible. But I wanted to show you that you can do that, and you can do an onClick function. It's just an HTML specification. When we get to the React section, you'll see that it has its own way of doing these type of events. So again, I'm going to restore that, refresh, back to our beautiful website. There's one other thing that we need to do, and that is we need to have the CSS at the bottom written here. That's very easy to do. We can just say CSS.textContent, which is new, you haven't seen it before, but we can just say body.style.background, and we'll add the semicolons. If I save and refresh, look at that. As we pick the gradient, we have this updating. Now, a few questions you may have. One, what is this text content thing? Up until now, I've shown you inner HTML. I also showed you create text node. And now we have text content. There's so many things to remember. What does this do? Well, it adds a text content. As you can see, there's many ways to add things to the DOM. And the reason I did this is because I wanted to show you the frustration that a lot of people had in early 2000s when working with the DOM. And in the next video, I'm going to talk about some of those issues and what we did to resolve them. And eventually, when we get into React, we'll see that we actually won't be using any of these because React has extracted all of these out for us so that it's a lot simpler than figuring out how to enter text content, adding event listeners, and all this stuff that can get, frankly, pretty frustrating at times. That's it for now. Let's see what else you can add onto this background. I'll leave the code for you in the next section so you can play around with it and make it even better than it is right now. I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.